Richard, welcome back on the mother of all talk shows. We just heard from Jerusalem that the United Nations has again refused to demand a ceasefire. Why is that?
Hi, George. Thanks for having me, and thanks for your kind words. Yes, it's unsurprising. I mean, this debacle that's been unfolding at the UN since yesterday, where they were meeting. This included the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and he dared to say that the Hamas attack on October 7th did not happen in a vacuum. And again, I'll just reiterate that he prefaced his sentence and finished his sentence by saying that this is wrong, and he condemns Hamas with all the usual disclaimers and precautions that Western politicians tiptoe around with before they say anything that Israel might take offense to. And nevertheless, the Israelis are asking him to resign. I mean, I've never heard of any UN country asking the Secretary General to resign. But of course, the Israelis, they're the first. And the reason the UN didn't come to a resolution or come to any form of agreement is because they're useless. And I take no pleasure in saying that. Unfortunately, the way the UN was designed at the end of World War II. In San Francisco, it put the five victors on a pedestal, and even though this includes the UK, it includes us, and it includes perhaps people with a bit more reason, such as the Chinese or the Russians, to counterbalance. I don't think this was sensible to have veto power and 5 permanent members, because again, this UN Security Council is 15 members. 10 of them on a rotating basis. We should have also been on a rotating basis, not permanently stationed there, because now, Israel essentially has 3 seats on the UN Security Council through us and the Americans and France. And nothing ever gets done. And even when they do pass the resolutions like UN Security Council Resolution 242, which was the first one to pass after the 67 war, clearly saying to Israel, you have to get out of the Golan Heights, you have to get out of the West Bank, you have to get out of East Jerusalem. They just ignore it. The Israelis always use the UN as the basis for their so-called legitimacy. They say we're a UN member state and we acceded through the partition plan. But then when the UN tells them to stop doing something bad and to stop occupying the territories of 3 countries, right, Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, they just flat out ignore it. They couldn't care less. I'm not surprised. Again, I don't say that lightly, because both my parents worked in the UN peacekeeping. They were in South Lebanon when the Israelis attacked it. My father was in the Golan Heights, which was between Syria and Israel. And, the Israelis have no respect for the UN. They attack UN positions regularly. They've even killed people, UN workers in South Lebanon. Just now, in the last 3 weeks, they've managed to kill 30 UN workers, from the UN Relief Agency, which is bewildering. Half of them are teachers. And then, of course, they kill journalists. They just killed one of Al Jazeera's veteran journalists, his family, and then they killed a Reuters journalist 2 weeks ago. And the medics, of course, they also kill medics. So, journalists, UN, and medical workers, the people who can witness Israel's crimes, who are there to try and remedy the crimes, provide a solution or some form of peace, they just get killed. So I never expected the UN to do anything, unfortunately.
If I arrived on this stricken planet from Mars and heard you describe quite accurately exactly how Israel behaves, and perhaps if you'd added that Israel actually came into being as a result of a United Nations resolution, and that they killed, murdered in terrorist attacks the leading United Nations official of the time, Count Bernadotte. And you told me that this gangster regime that you've just described, whilst hating the UN, is actually still a member of it. And I would ask you, how can that possibly be? How would you answer that?
I don't know. I mean, the world is mad. I don't think the UN, unfortunately, it's a defunct, incapable, impotent body. I'm not saying that it shouldn't exist. It should exist, but really, like, actually, when we apply the UN Charter, for example, that you can't occupy someone else's country or kill them, or basic things. We're not asking much. If Israel actually cared, they would just follow the UN Charter. It's really not complicated. And then, of course, the Security Council resolutions. I mean, the fact that they couldn't come to an agreement today is shocking. What is there to disagree about? The Israelis have butchered 2,000 children. They managed to surpass their brutality of 2014, which even I did not anticipate. But I guess I should have seen this coming. It's just beyond anything we've ever seen in Gaza, and they still managed to surpass it. It's very clear that you should condemn that and nothing else. There's no need to disagree or agree about Hamas. Hamas are a byproduct of resistance. They're a consequence of occupation. If it's not Hamas, it will be PIJ, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, or anybody, the average person, just taking up arms. Palestinians have tried every route. They've tried all forms of diplomacy, and we've left them no recourse. The Oslo Accords are completely useless. Even Netanyahu himself says that they're useless. They're dead. So they've tried diplomacy. The UN was there to supervise. The UN is on the ground even in Palestine, and they cannot do anything. So if the UN Charter and the Geneva Convention say that the only thing you've left is armed struggle, and the Palestinians apply the law. And it's not just about the law, it's the moral position to resist an occupier. How can we blame them and disagree about that? Even a ceasefire, in my opinion, is too light. What does that mean, a ceasefire? Just so the Israelis can go bomb Gaza again in a year or 2 years or 3 years and do the same massacre all over again? There's something very, very deeply wrong about what Israel is. And it's a colonial outpost. The only way this is going to be fixed is if Palestinians are given back their lands, that they have the real right to return, and that the Zionist settlers that we sent to Palestine also return to their homes. It's not a complicated solution. You don't even need the UN to do it. It just takes common sense. But yes, George, I really wish that the United Nations could actually fulfill their duties, that everybody would be much better off. And Guterres should not have to hold a press conference today, groveling before the Israelis. He should call them out as terrorists. He should call them out as being violent, because the word terrorist has been diluted by now. But, he shouldn't have to apologize to them or pretend like he said something wrong yesterday. On the contrary, I think his remarks were too light. So, we need to have people that stand up for what the UN Charter says, that apply it, and that's all it would take.
What's the feeling about the Lebanese front? There's obviously skirmishing going on. Israel is poking the bear. They are bombing Syria's airports in Aleppo and Damascus. They are killing Hezbollah fighters who are killing back across the frontier with anti-tank shells. But the feared all-out war on the Lebanese front has not yet, at least, taken fire. Do you expect it to?
I don't think that Hezbollah getting involved in a fashion similar to 2006 or on that scale is contingent upon whether the Israelis go in to Gaza, with a ground invasion. I think that the Israelis, they're just not the same military power that they were 50 years ago, for example. They are unable to contend with the challenges that Hamas pose. If they go in there, it's going to be like a cemetery for them. It's booby-trapped. Hamas have such an elaborate network of tunnels. They are prepared for this. The Israelis are not. The Israelis are better described as a bunch of holiday goers with guns that are just prowling Gaza beach. they don't have the same drive that a Palestinian has to liberate their homeland. You know, an Israeli can just run to the airport and go back to whichever country they have as a dual, a second citizenship, or even third. Palestinians have nowhere to go. They can't even go next door to Egypt. They can't even go next door, which Israel would love, by the way, so they can get rid of them. Palestinians have the drive of somebody fighting on their own land and fighting for their land, just like the Vietnamese against the French and against the Americans. You cannot replace that or replicate it or imitate it or buy it or train it into someone. So when it comes to Lebanon, the Hezbollah have been involved and in a very elaborate way, because what they've been doing is causing panic and paranoia amongst the Israelis. They don't actually have to commit themselves to pushing through like Hamas did on October 7th. Just by shelling some of the Israeli positions, which I should reiterate are on Lebanese soil, they're illegally occupied by Israel. Just by doing that, Israel have sent multiple divisions up to the north, because they are paranoid. You know, they've got their finger on the trigger, and they're scared that Hezbollah is going to come and humiliate them, like in 2006, at any moment. And so, by doing that, the Israelis have also had to not only dedicate forces to the northern front, but also evacuate all these settlements. They've evacuated around 30 settlements. So now, ironically, the Israelis who have come and put Arabs in tents and displaced Arabs from their homes are themselves now displaced and having to live in tents. The Israelis have created a 10-kilometer buffer zone in the north with Lebanon, because they're afraid that Hezbollah is going to wipe the floor with them. And so now the Israeli settlers, tens of thousands of them, have been evacuated, and they're experiencing but a little taste of their own medicine, of what they've inflicted on the Arabs, and particularly the Palestinians. Hezbollah have also shelled the radar, the electronic warfare, and the surveillance systems that the Israelis have erected on Lebanese soil. And they've crippled around 70% of Israel's electronic capabilities there. So the Israelis would be fighting, with half an eye, essentially. So the thing that Israel did is that they changed the rules of engagement when they killed that Reuters journalist. You know, before Hezbollah Hezbollah and Hamas have always only targeted military objectives. But Israel, by killing the journalist Issam Abdullah from Reuters, they changed the rules of engagement. And this is a very, very dangerous game, because Israeli settlers are not even civilians to begin with. They're all in the military, male and female. They all have access to guns, and they can kill with impunity while the Israeli occupation forces stand right behind them or beside them. So this is a very dangerous game, and we're seeing shelling going from 2 kilometers inwards to 5 kilometers to 7. And after 2006, I didn't think the Israelis could be humiliated in a similar fashion, or even in a greater fashion, by Hamas, but it happened. And with all the training, the munitions, the ordnances that Iran have supplied to Hezbollah, they've been training, and Israel is not ready for a fight with either one of them. I remember in 2006 how the Hezbollah fighters would come up from the ground, from the tunnels they've dug, taking the Israelis by surprise. And that's just one aspect of it, George. The Israelis really, really should back down, because maybe they think the Americans are going to clean up after them, but that's not going to transpire, I'm afraid.
Finally, you've been punished for your truth-telling. You've been demonetized by YouTube. How can people help you?
Well, this is the second time they do it. The first time was in 2020, and coincidentally, I was talking about the Abraham Accords, which was, also heavily critical of Israel. They can support me by donating on PayPal or on Patreon. The URL is patreon.com/Richard Medhurst, and that would be a great help. And I appreciate you plugging my show, George. It's very much appreciated. Thank you.